Welcome back to another episode of I Wish They Knew, a show where leaders in business and education share a tip, practice, or insight they wish others knew more about. I'm Joe Hirsch. Today's wish comes from David Burkus. David is a best-selling author of 4 books, a TEDx presenter, and you've read his work in places like Harvard Business Review, Forbes, The Wall Street Journal, BBC, Bloomberg Business Week, pretty much anywhere that leadership and business is covered. He's the author most recently of Leading from Anywhere, and today he shares his wish with us. David, thanks for joining us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
So what do you wish more people knew about leadership? Because it's a time where leaders are really discovering who they are and who they need to be.
Yeah. So, I've done in a lot of my work in a lot of different books, I've talked about this issue of motivation. How do we do it with our teams? How do we do it from afar right now in the world that we live in? And I wish more leaders knew, I wish more of everybody knew that the most potent human motivator out there is progress. It's not incentives. It's also not even that sort of intrinsic sense of doing the work. That's great. Like the pleasure you get from doing work is great, but it's compounded and made better when people feel a sense of progress, when they feel like they're growing, or they feel like they're part of a team that's moving somewhere, or a company that's actually making an impact and they can measure the progress they're making towards that impact. We spend a ton of time dreaming up the perfect incentive compensation system, or talking about the perfect ways to sort of give performance feedback in terrible systems like annual review systems, et cetera. And if we knew that what we should be optimizing for is how do we demonstrate progress, we'd have a completely different system and a better one, I should say.
What do leaders need to be doing more of to help people realize that incremental sense of progress?
Yeah. So, I think most leaders now know, okay, we've got to set objectives mutually, and we've got to figure out how we're going to measure them and that sort of thing. And then we just sort of turn our brain off when it comes to what are the little wins that we're going to celebrate along the way. So I think this is twofold. I think one, the two biggest things you could do are when you get, as a leader, when you get some email about progress, or some email celebrating something somebody on your team did, or a thank you note from a customer, external or internal, all of that sort of stuff, keep it, because you're going to want to use it at your all hands meetings, at your one-on-one meetings, et cetera. And often if you don't just save it, like I tell most leaders, create a little folder in your email inbox that says win, and just drag everything in there. And then before you go into a meeting with your team, look through it and see, what can I pull out that shows that we're winning? What can I pull out that shows that we're making progress? And use those examples. If you don't proactively do that, then you're going to end up at that weekly all hands meeting and not have a clue what to say. And then you'll just get back into the normal stuff that doesn't actually motivate, reminding people of their objectives, trying to figure out who's not making progress, and then what you can do to fix it, which is well-meaning, but also sort of demotivating, right? And then the second thing I think is important to do is, as you're doing individual, like one-on-ones, checking in, or even giving that annual performance review feedback, spoiler alert, you should be giving feedback way more than once a year.
100%.
Right. The important thing to note is not just how they're doing, but where they came from, right? So anytime you're talking about, here's where I see you in this skill, but remember that 6 months ago, this was a struggle for you, right? Or remember that a year ago, this was something that you really had to focus on. And now you could do it blindfolded, riding on horseback, right? Those sort of little things you add into the conversation are those little progress markers, and they make a world of difference. And you know what the best part about all of this is, by the way? All of this is free. All of this just costs a little bit more time than you're already spending anyway, which, is bad news for every incentive compensation consultant out there, but good news for every leader out there.
That is a great case for what leaders can do, but are there things that individuals can do to help track their own sense of progress in that moment so that they feel like they're actually moving towards that bigger goal?
Yeah. So I'm a big fan of little things like journaling. There used to be I think it used to be a free service. Now it's a paid service called I Done This, that would send you an email and just ask you, what did you work on today? Mm-hmm. But you could do the same thing with a physical journal. There are numerous apps that kind of track that, even not even just writing out what you did, but there are apps that just track, did you keep the streak alive? If you're trying to do this activity on a regular day. All of those are great things you can do to proactively measure it. In the moment that you're making that diary entry, it doesn't really help. What helps is 3 months from now, when you can look back and go, oh my gosh, I'm on a 90-day streak of doing this task, or I look back on my journals and I look about how I used to write about this activity and how much I struggled with it. And now it's easy. Like it's what happens when you look back on all of those entries that you're making that's when you see the progress. The downside is you got to start doing that now, but do it and trust that it'll show progress in the future.
What would you say to leaders who grow impatient with the progress that unfolds over time? They're looking for big wins right now, not small wins over time.
Yeah, well, big wins happen when you add up a bunch of small wins, right?
Mm-hmm.
There is zero. What is that? What is the quote? Spectacular achievement has always been preceded by unspectacular activity or something like that. So I'm botching the quote. Now we're going to have to look it up. But the idea behind it is that there is no big win without the day-to-day mundane, without the small incremental improvements. It just doesn't happen. People don't rise to the occasion. They fall to the level of their training, the level of their day-to-day, and whether or not that day-to-day has prepared them for that big occasion is the issue, right? And so if you're just focused on that, you're going to end up, I don't know, trying to rally the troops and give these grandiose speeches and then find people can't do the activity you want them to do.
Small wins over time build confidence, build competence, and ultimately, I would think, build greater clarity in the organization.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
It's a great wish, David. Thank you so much for sharing that. And hopefully more people will be tracking their progress. Hey, I think I did a little bit better on this podcast today than I did last time. Small win.
Well, I'm going to go back and listen to all of those old episodes and I'll let you know, because you've got a record. And so now you can tell. I can tell you as a former podcaster, I definitely saw it. I look back and I'm embarrassed by my first season of my show, right? So pretty strong sign that I made progress. And I think that's the case for kind of all of us that make things. You're going to end up embarrassed by your old stuff, but take heart. That means you're making progress.
It's not where you're going as much as where you've come from.
Exactly.
Great advice, David. Thank you so much for sharing.
Oh, thank you for having me.